pair of well-loved socks, which are just irritatingly short for my boots. Whenever I'm wearing them, the cuff just it just pulls under and gets caught under my heel, and I'd like to lengthen them. So I'm going to show you how to make your socks longer after you've already finished knitting them. If you're watching this video, I'm assuming that you already have the skills you need to make your own socks. If you don't, I'll put some links in the description. You're going to need to know how to knit, purl, and cast off. So if you can do those three things, you should be able to do this no problem. So I'm going to show you on just this one sock. There's a couple of ways to do this. We're going to do it the really simple way. You can see there's a bit of a scallop on top of this sock. It's just from the cabling, but it makes the edge a little bit harder to keep smooth. So a couple ways I could do this. I could cut off the top of the edge, pick up the live stitches, and then just keep knitting. There is a potential I can drop stitches. It's a little bit difficult with the cabling, and it can take some time, but it gives you a really nice continuous look. I'm going to do a simpler method. So let's turn the sock inside out. And these socks are not new. You can tell I've done some work on these in the past. On the back of your sock, you should be able to see the stitches. And you can see that each stitch is kind of a V. It has like two legs to it. As near to the top of the sock as you can. Go into one side of that V, not both. Skip the other side of the V, and then go into the next stitch. It's also the same. So you're kind of going this like over, under, over, under. It doesn't really matter which side you pick. It will give you a little bit of a different finish at the end. But for our purposes, it's not important. So now if you look really closely, most socks will have a ribbing pattern on the ankle like this, where it's knit stitches and then purl stitches and then knit stitches. You should be able to see, there's 4 knit stitches on this side, so you should be able to see 4 little bumps in the same color as the row you're in along the bottom. So I can go 1, 2, 3, 4. So you're going to go into those bumps from the top and pick up the stitch. So there's 1. And if you go into it from the bottom, if you can't get in from the top, it works too. It's just going to be harder to knit it later. So I've got the first 2 and then 1, 2, 3. And then 4. Okay, now I've got the easy part again. Pick up my 2 legs, and I'm just going to keep going around like that and picking them up. When I feel like this needle is too hard to manage, I can grab another one. This would also work with circular needles if you prefer those. Okay, so I've picked up all the stitches. It doesn't super duper matter what loops you've picked up. If that was frustrating and you're like, I don't know where I went or if I got the right ones or what, it's okay. The important part is just to get the same number of stitches as you had previously, or roughly similar will work too. The next step is to knit the rest of the sock. So I now have essentially stitches on here, and I can push them to the end, insert my needle as though I were going to knit. I have a few options. I can just knit like normal. I can do a ribbing pattern. I could do the same pattern as is on the sock. I could cable. I think I'm just going to do a basic ribbing because I want to do a cuff that I can fold over my boot if I want to. I like to do the first row of something like this, just knitting, just because it's simpler. It gives you a good foundation for whatever you're going to do next. These stitches will feel quite tight, which is totally normal. It's just because they've already been knit and now you're knitting them again. So there's extra fabric in there. Your next row will be whatever your normal gauge is. I do recommend using a smaller needle size than you would normally use to pick up the stitches and knit this first row. It just makes life a whole lot easier. I didn't have the exact right yarn color anymore, So I picked something similar. You could also go with something contrasting, but do pick the same content of the yarn. So if you used a sock yarn to make your socks, like a wool nylon blend, I would use a wool nylon blend for this as well. If it's a cotton sock or cotton linen, any of those beautiful summer socks, go with that. So I'm just going to knit all the way around, and then I will check back in and we'll do a ribbing pattern. Okay, so I've knit every one of those loops I picked up all the way around, and now it's time to start a ribbing pattern. And I have cabling and purl stitches. So I'm going to be purling 4 and then knitting 2 and then purling 4 and knitting 2. And again, you can do any pattern you feel like. There are no rules. It's worth noticing that you're going to want to mark where you started knitting around, the beginning of your round. I usually mark it just with this string that is always at the start after I join a new yarn. That's how I tell, and I use double pointed needles, so it's always a clear beginning. If you use circular needles, you probably will want to put a marker on. I'm just going to keep going around and around, but I wanted to show you on the other side. This method of picking up the loops without cutting them gives you this little like fringe. I think it looks cute. Makes kind of a nice cuff, but you may not like it, which is totally fair. You could also pick up these stitches like we did on the right side of the sock, but that would make this little cuff be on the inside, and for me that will rub on my ankle and bother me, but it may not bother you. So once you've got the sock to the height you want it, it's time to bind off. You can do any bind off method that works for you, your favorite one, as long as it's a little bit stretchy. You don't want to do something super, super tight, obviously, because then you can't get it over your foot. I like this one. So you knit 1 stitch, and then you knit the next stitch, and then you just lift the first stitch over the second one. And now I can just go all the way around doing that. But again, so many bind off options out there. You can see how it creates this sort of knit ridge along the top there. When you get to your last stitch, time to break the yarn and pull the end through that last loop there and tighten it off. This is getting to be a very crazy looking patchwork sock. And if you tried this and it worked or didn't, pop it in the comments. Also, I'd love to hear about your favorite cast off method, because I'm always looking for new techniques to try.